I remember it vividly. The day I set foot back on American soil after 8 months living in the sand and gunfire of the Middle East. The sky was lead gray that day, cold wind whipping across the wet tarmac, the smell of jet fuel still clinging to the inside of my nose. The sound of the Black Hawk helicopter that had just disappeared behind the hangars still echoed in my ears, like the war hadn't quite let go of me. Even though my body was finally home, I stepped onto the tarmac with my worn-out backpack slung over one shoulder, the soles of my boots making that dry, hollow sound on the cold concrete. Other soldiers were laughing, waving, pulling loved ones close who were waiting just beyond the barrier. Me? I just stood there, alone, no one waiting. But what chilled me wasn't the absence of a familiar face, but this strange feeling twisting in my gut. Something was wrong. I should have felt relief. I'd survived 20 years in special forces. No more jolting awake to 3 a.m. sirens. No more midnight ambushes, no more counting bodies in no man's land. I was back, but the relief never landed. Instead, that gut feeling hit me again, heavy as the body armor I just shed. We had a saying in the unit, if something feels wrong, it is wrong, and I felt it. The second the wheels touched down, as I was dragging my pack toward the rental car lot, the phone in my pocket buzzed. A text from Graham Tate, old teammate, been through hell and back with him more times than I could count. The message was just one line. I know you don't want to hear this, brother, but she didn't wait. I froze, stared at the screen. My grip tightened on the pack strap, knuckles turning white. Didn't reply. Couldn't. My heart rate actually slowed, like my body was prepping for another firefight. Only this time, it was in the one place that was supposed to be safe, my own home. I knew how to handle getting shot, getting blown up. But I had no idea what to do when the wound came from someone who was supposed to be my anchor. Claire, she'd been the reason I endured the darkness out there. The one who'd call between ops just to whisper, I'll wait for you, however long it takes. We'd been together since I was 22, married at 24. Had our son, Ben. He's 8 now. Just the thought of his face when he saw me. I tried to push that bad feeling down, ignored the instinct, got in the rental. Cold leather seats. The air inside felt thick, suffocating, like all the windows were rolled up tight, trapping the heavy breaths of a man afraid to face the truth. I pulled up the map, typed in the address, Oakview Drive. The 2-story house, white paint, blue shutters, the wooden fence I'd nailed together myself. Painted the front steps during my first real leave 5 years back. On the drive over, some old country song crackled on the radio, a steel guitar whining into the space between heartbeats. I didn't hear it, just the engine hum, and my own voice echoing in my head, over and over. No way. Not possible. But the battlefield teaches you one thing. Anything's possible when trust is misplaced. When I turned onto our street, everything looked the same. The big oak tree out front stood tall, its leaves just starting to turn that fiery autumn gold. The tire swing still hung from a thick branch. Claire had insisted on keeping it, said she wanted Ben to always remember what being a kid felt like. The porch light was on, curtains drawn neat. It looked peaceful, staged almost. But I knew, the real fight never gives you a warning. I parked the car, killed the engine, and just sat there for a long moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. My chest wasn't tight anymore, just still, quietly alert. Got out. The wind carried the familiar scent of the lavender Claire had planted along the walkway. But this time, something else was mixed in. Faint, but sharp. Distinct. Cologne that wasn't mine. The smell of different leather. A man's scent. Tried the front door. Unlocked. Stepped inside. The house was so quiet I could hear the soft grit under my own boots on the hardwood floor. I dropped my pack in the middle of the living room, taking it all in. Everything was in its place. Our wedding photo on the mantle, coats hanging on the rack by the door, Claire's slippers tucked neatly beside the bottom stair. But there was no sound. No Ethan. No footsteps running down the stairs. No familiar, tight hug I'd dreamed about every goddamn night in the barracks. I called out softly, Claire. Silence stretched. Then, hurried footsteps from upstairs. Claire appeared at the landing. Her blonde hair was slightly messy, pulled back loosely. She wore a thin silk robe, her hand clutching the collar tight at her neck. Her eyes blinked rapidly. Then a smile bloomed, maybe a little too bright. You're home early. Her voice caught, just a little. But those words, they stopped me cold. Not what she said, but how she said it. She was the one who'd circled today's date in bright red on the kitchen calendar, the one who'd written homecoming, finally, in her perfect script right underneath it. I stepped forward, pulled her into a gentle hug. She hugged back, But it was hollow, empty, like holding air. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. My body remembered what a real hug felt like, and it knew, instantly, what it felt like when someone was playing the part of a wife. I leaned down, kissed the top of her hair. Smelled like her usual shampoo. But through the soft strands, I caught it, a flicker of her eyes towards the hallway. A quick, almost imperceptible scan, like checking if anything or anyone was out of place. I said nothing. I'd raided enemy compounds with nothing but an old map and a blurry satellite photo. I knew how to read the slight tremor in a hand reaching for a coffee cup, the way eyes dart sideways at the wrong moment, the subtle waver in a voice trying too hard to sound calm in the quiet. And I knew this battle, the one unfolding right here in my own home, couldn't be fought with bullets. It had to be fought with silence and waiting, because only silence makes a traitor reveal everything. That first night back, I didn't sleep, not because the bed felt strange, not because of lingering ghosts from the war. 20 years in the service teaches you to sleep anywhere, concrete floors, shaking helicopters, frozen ground. No, this time I lay perfectly still, eyes wide open, staring at the familiar ceiling of our bedroom, feeling like I was bivouacked deep in enemy territory. Claire had made the room look perfect. Fresh sheets, the faint scent of lavender she always put on the pillows. But it was too perfect, too staged, like a set designed to hide something just out of view. She lay on her side, her back to me. It was the way she always slept when she was angry, when there was something she didn't want to talk about. But there was no anger radiating off her now. Just silence, and the space between us on the mattress felt wider than the damn Atlantic. I lay there, unblinking, listening to the wind whistling through the window frame, the tick-tock of the old clock downstairs, and the soft buzz of a phone vibrating on the nightstand on Claire's side, exactly 1:47 a.m. She stirred, slowly, deliberately, then reached out a careful hand for the phone. The screen's pale light illuminated her cheekbone, catching an expression I couldn't quite read. She stared at the message for a few long seconds, then slipped out of bed, quiet as a cat moving across carpet. I didn't move a muscle. I'd once spent 12 hours crammed under an enemy commander's bed, just waiting for one of his guards to step outside for a smoke. I knew how to breathe silently, how to make my heartbeat blend with the background noise. Right then, I used every bit of that training, didn't let a single twitch betray me. The bedroom door opened a crack, then closed with a soft click. I counted 10 seconds, then swung my legs over the side of the bed. I moved into the hallway without turning on any lights. Darkness was an ally. Paced my steps with my breathing. From the top of the stairs, looking down, I saw her, standing in the kitchen, silhouetted by the dim glow from the microwave clock. Her back was to me, head tilted slightly, phone pressed tight against her ear. Her voice was a low whisper, meant only for the night. I can't talk long. A pause. Then, even softer, almost a confession. I miss you too. My chest seized up. Not like taking a punch, but like a sudden, icy clamp tightening from the inside out. I'd heard men scream when they were hit, watched my entire unit walk into an ambush. I never thought 4 simple words could detonate inside me like that. Tomorrow? Same place, she continued, her voice trembling just slightly, but filled with that familiar, intimate tenderness, the kind she only used for someone she trusted, someone she believed truly loved her. I didn't move closer. Didn't want her to know I'd heard. Not yet. I slipped back into the bedroom. It didn't feel like a sanctuary anymore. It felt like a temporary operating base behind enemy lines. I was back under the covers just as Claire returned, moving as silently as if she'd never left. She slid into bed, turned her back again. That empty space between us remained, thick and unbreachable as a concrete wall. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the gap in the curtains, but inside me, everything still felt dim, shrouded. Claire was already up, standing in the kitchen, making coffee. Her voice floated towards me, impossibly light and normal. Want toast or eggs, honey? I sat down at the kitchen island, watching her. She wore a pale blue long-sleeved shirt, her hair tied back neatly, a touch of makeup on her face, like it was just another ordinary Monday morning. Not a single trace of last night's clandestine call. No awkwardness. No hesitant, "Did you hear anything?" glance. "Eggs," I replied, my voice so calm it surprised even me. Then, my 8-year-old boy came barreling down the stairs. He launched himself at me, hugging my legs like he was afraid I might evaporate again. I pulled him close, held him tight, soaking in that small, fierce warmth like it was the only life raft in a cold, treacherous sea. Whatever else was broken or breaking, I still had him. During breakfast, I watched Claire. She smiled at Ben, talked about his homework, asked me generic questions about the flight home. But her eyes only skimmed past mine, never lingered long enough for me to really see inside. I'd interrogated prisoners of war. I knew when someone was telling the truth, when they were weaving a story, when they were playing the victim. And Claire was performing. But this time, I didn't need a confession ripped from her. I needed cold, hard facts. And I was going to get them, my way. That morning, I decided to plan a tracking app on her phone. I had the skills, honed over years of needing intel in places where asking wasn't an option. I didn't need her password. I just needed opportunity, observation, and execution. Because this war fought in silence within my own walls, didn't need guns. It needed patience, and I was terrifyingly good at patience. I used to think nothing could break me after all those years facing down death. Turns out, betrayal, when it comes from inside your own home, from the person you built that home with, hits harder than any IED I ever dismantled. 3 days after I got back, I had the proof. Not from a tearful confession, not from a screaming match, but from silence and technology. I was trained to infiltrate some of the most secure systems on the planet. A personal cell phone wasn't a challenge. It took me 10 minutes one morning, while Claire was in the shower, to install the data backup and location tracking software. From that moment on, every text message she sent or received, every call log, her real-time location, it all mirrored silently onto my own device. I didn't do it out of spite or paranoia. I did it because I needed certainty. On the battlefield, ambiguity gets you killed. In my own life, it was slowly poisoning me. I needed the unvarnished truth. That afternoon, my phone buzzed while I was standing by the kitchen counter, nursing a cup of black coffee. The notification popped up. Dylan Parker. Can't wait to see you again. Beautiful. I stared at the name. Dylan. A name I hadn't heard in maybe 10 years. He was an old college buddy of Claire's. Tall guy, always dressed a little too sharp. Showed up at a couple of early family parties years ago with slicked back hair and jokes that fell flat. Then he just faded from our circle. Never considered him a threat. Always seemed too superficial to be serious about anything. And now, here was his name, attached to the word beautiful. Directed at my wife, my hand clenched around the warm ceramic mug, knuckles straining white. But my face remained impassive. Blank. I'd kept my expression neutral hearing news that men under my command hadn't made it back. I could do the same now. Claire was in the living room, laughing softly into her phone with someone. Maybe a coworker, maybe him. Ben was sprawled on the floor, giggling at cartoons. I walked over, sat down in the armchair opposite the couch, placed my phone screen up on the end table, and opened the conversation thread. Claire's message sent just before his. Tomorrow, same place? Dylan's reply. Always. I'll bring your favorite. I didn't need to know what her favorite was. I didn't give a damn about the place they were talking about. What I knew, with chilling certainty, was this. The truth wasn't a gut feeling anymore. It was right there, in black and white. Solid. Undeniable. I took a slow sip of coffee. The bitterness seeped onto my tongue, down my throat, into my gut. I closed my eyes for a second, took a deep, controlled breath, and let that bitterness teach me how to swallow this reality whole. That evening, I pretended to turn in early. Claire sat up in bed, bathed in the soft glow of her bedside lamp, phone in hand, thumb scrolling steadily. I slipped a tiny, near-invisible Bluetooth earpiece into my ear, paired it with my phone hidden under the pillow, monitoring her text remotely. Every time she hit send, my phone gave a silent, haptic pulse against the pillowcase. I didn't need to look. I just counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 messages back and forth. I could almost feel her hesitation, typing, deleting, typing again. Finally, she sent one that made my own phone vibrate with its mirrored arrival. I think he's starting to notice. And then Dylan's reply, quick and confident. We'll figure it out. Don't panic. He has no idea. Lying there, I listened to my own heartbeat, slow and steady as a countdown timer. A primal part of me wanted to surge up, rip the phone from her hand, confront her, shatter that calm facade. But the other part, the soldier, the survivor trained in deserts and hostile cities, whispered, not yet. Hold, I needed more intel. Needed to map the entire battlefield before making a move. What else was she hiding? What was Dylan Parker really up to? How long had this been going on? Who else knew? And the most critical piece of intel I still lacked. What was I going to do with this ugly truth? The next morning, Claire was unusually cheerful, humming along to some old love song on the radio while she cooked, a song I'd put on a mixtape for her when we first started dating. Sunny side up eggs landed perfectly on the plate next to crisp toast. She wore a cream-colored floral dress, the one she always wore when she wanted to make a good impression. I sat at the table, watching her every move. She placed my coffee mug in front of me, smiling. "Sleep okay?" I looked at her, held her gaze for a long moment, then gave a slight nod. "Yeah, better than I expected." I don't know if she sensed anything off. Probably not. She was too comfortable in her role, too confident in her deception. But I'd spent 3 days embedded with enemy fighters once, pretending to be one of them, without blowing my cover. I knew how to be quiet, how to be still, how to let the silence make the other person reveal everything without realizing it. When Claire left the house, claiming she needed to run to the grocery store, I stood at the upstairs window, tracking her movements. She walked quickly, a subtle tension in her shoulders, a slight hurry in her step. I pulled out my phone, opened the tracking app. The little blue dot representing her car moved steadily, not towards the local market, but towards a high-end hotel on the west side of the city. The kind of place with just enough security to deter casual snoopers. But I wasn't casual. A couple of discreet calls, a few carefully worded favors owed to me by old contacts in civilian security, and I had temporary, remote access to the hallway security cameras on the 14th floor. The exact floor her phone's GPS indicated she was heading towards. I watched on my screen as she stepped out of the elevator, walked down the corridor, stopped at a door. She knocked. The door opened. Dylan Parker appeared. He was smiling, leaned in, pulled her inside. The door clicked shut, and for me, watching that screen go blank except for the empty hallway, that's when the real war began. Not a war to win back my wife. That battle was already lost. This was a war to reclaim my self-respect, my honor, and to deliver a cold dose of justice to the man who had turned me into a fool in my own home. I used to think the most dangerous enemy was the one holding a gun. I was wrong. Traitors don't need weapons. They just need a convincing smile and a lie repeated often enough. And this time, the traitor was sleeping in my bed every night, calling my name sweetly during the day, while whispering secrets to another man in the dark, using the same intimate tone I thought was reserved only for me. I gripped my phone tighter, the cool metal pressing into my palm. Only one thought echoed in the sudden, fierce silence of my mind. This is the final mission, and I will not withdraw. I used to believe no one could beat a trained special forces operative at hiding emotions. We were drilled to see through lies, to read micro-expressions, to catch the smallest signal of deception. Turns out, the hardest changes to spot are the ones in the person you love most. The person whose baseline you know better than your own. Claire knew me too well. She knew how to keep her breathing even, how to hold my gaze without flinching, exactly when to smile, when to fall silent. She played her part so convincingly that if I hadn't had the cold, hard data from the tracking software, I might have started to doubt my own gut, wondering if the sand and stress had finally broken something inside me. 3 days home. Every text, every call log, every GPS ping fed directly to my phone. Not because I was paranoid, because I'd seen too many good men get blindsided back home while they thought they were loved and missed. I wasn't going to be the next casualty of a war fought on the home front. That afternoon, I was alone in the garage, the place I'd spent a whole week of leave assembling Ben's bunk bed years ago. My phone lay on the workbench. The screen lit up. The message was stark. "Dylan Parker, can't wait to see you again. Beautiful." My heart didn't pound. It just settled, heavy and cold in my chest. I knew this was coming. Dylan, Claire's old friend. The guy who told lame jokes at reunions, the one I dismissed as harmlessly slick, too polished to be trustworthy but not dangerous. I scrolled up. The conversation lay bare. Claire calling him babe. Him calling her my escape. They weren't just texting. They were meeting. At a hotel called the Grand Vista. Claire had texted, "Same room as last time." Dylan replied, "I've stocked your favorite wine." I looked at those words like staring at a crack slowly spiderwebbing across a solid wall. But I didn't yell, didn't throw the phone. I just leaned back against the cool concrete wall of the garage, tilted my head back, and let the anger seep into my veins. Slow, controlled, methodical. In the military, when you're ambushed, you don't just start firing wildly. You assess the situation, pinpoint the enemy's location, identify their weaknesses, then you engage. And this time, the primary enemy target was sleeping less than 3 feet away from me every night. When I went back inside, Claire was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables. Late afternoon sun streamed through the window, catching the gold in her hair. She turned, smiled at me. That smile used to be my anchor during long deployments. Now, it just sent a chill down my spine. "Dinner soon?" she asked, her voice light, normal. I nodded. "Yeah, smells good." What is it? Roast chicken. Your favorite. She replied, turning back to the cutting board, as if nothing was simmering beneath the surface of our picture-perfect life. Ben ran in from the living room, tackled my legs, then dragged me down to the floor to build with Legos. I sat there, clicking bricks together, making a small red truck for him, while my mind replayed the messages I just read. I couldn't let him sense anything. He was innocent in this. He was the only part of my world that hadn't been contaminated by the lies. When we sat down for dinner, Claire poured wine. A red, the same label Dylan mentioned stocking at the hotel. I stared at the glass she placed in front of me, feeling strangely detached, like I was sitting at a party I hadn't been invited to. The meal passed in unusual quiet. Claire picked at her food, occasionally glancing at me, perhaps waiting for me to say something, to react. I just watched her over the rim of my wine glass. I have that early meeting tomorrow, she said, her voice carefully neutral. Probably have to leave around 7. I nodded. Okay. I'll get Ben ready for school. She smiled, a quick dip of her head towards her plate. But I saw her fingers tighten almost imperceptibly on the napkin in her lap. A flicker of anxiety, small but telling. She was hiding more than just the affair. Later that night, after she thought I was asleep, I slipped out onto the back porch. Didn't turn on the light. The October night air had a bite to it, but I barely felt it. Listened to the crickets, the wind rustling the leaves, and the almost silent sound of Claire moving inside, retrieving her phone from the charger again. She was texting. I pulled out my own phone. Her words appeared on my screen almost simultaneously as she typed them. Claire, I can't keep lying. He's acting strange. I think he knows. Dylan, then we need to move faster. Book the next weekend. I'll take care of everything. I switched off the screen. Didn't need to read anymore. I had the intel. She wasn't just betraying me. She was planning an exit strategy, planning to dismantle our family, taking our son with her if she could spin the right story. I stood up, went back inside. Walking past the bedroom door, I paused, looked in. She lay there, breathing evenly, eyes closed. One hand rested near the phone, its screen dark now. That faint light reflected off her face, a mask of peaceful slumber. I entered the room quietly, moving with the practiced stealth of someone returning from a night patrol. Which, in a way, I was. But this time, I wasn't carrying back wounds. I was carrying a decision. Tomorrow, I would let her go. Let her drive to that hotel. Let her meet Dylan. And I would follow, not to make a scene, not to start a fight, but to gather the final pieces of evidence, to document the end. Because a traitor doesn't need accusations. They need a mirror held up to their actions. A cold, sharp mirror reflecting nothing but the unvarnished truth. And I would be that mirror. The next morning, it was raining lightly. Tiny droplets beaded on the car windshield, blurring the outside world like a faded memory. I sat in the driver's seat, hands resting on the wheel, eyes fixed on the front door of our house. Claire emerged, wearing a long dress, a beige trench coat, her hair pulled back neatly. She carried a small black handbag, the one she only used for special occasions, or apparently, secret rendezvous. She'd said she was going to the grocery store, then stopping by the bakery Ben liked. But I knew her tells now, the slightly too quick pace, the way she avoided looking directly at the house as she locked the door, the overemphasis on mundane details to mask the real destination. Her silver sedan rolled out of the driveway and turned onto the main street. I waited 30 seconds, then started my engine, keeping enough distance to stay out of her rearview mirror, but close enough not to lose her in the morning traffic. I tailed enemy vehicles through bombed-out city streets, tracked supply trucks through moonless Iraqi nights, following my own wife through the quiet, rain-slicked streets of our peaceful suburban town. Felt colder, bleaker than any war zone. She drove calmly. Steady speed, signaling properly. She was careful, calculated, determined not to give anything away. But the GPS tracker pinging from her phone didn't lie. It led me straight to where I already knew she was going. The Grand Vista Hotel sat on the western edge of the city. Tasteful facade, tinted windows, discreet brass lettering. Not a place for family vacations. It was a place for secrets, for people escaping the scrutiny of their everyday lives. Claire parked, checked her reflection in the rearview mirror one last time, smoothed her hair, then stepped out. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the hotel door. Then she disappeared inside the warm, golden light of the lobby. I didn't follow her in. I didn't need to. The day before, I'd contacted an old service buddy, someone now working high-level corporate security. A brief call, an old favor called in, a quiet assurance that I wasn't planning anything crazy, and I had temporary, remote access to the hotel's security system feeds. From the phone cradled in my hand, I watched Claire cross the lobby, enter the elevator, press the button for the 14th floor. She waited, glanced around nervously, then looked down, her shoulders hunching slightly, not the posture of an innocent woman meeting a friend. The elevator doors opened on 14. She stepped out, walked down the plushly carpeted hallway to room 1408. Knocked twice, paused, then once more. The doors swung open. Dylan Parker stood there. He wore a crisp white shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, holding a glass of wine, smiling that slick, self-satisfied smile, as if the only thing that mattered was the pleasure waiting behind that closed door. Claire stepped inside, and the door clicked shut. I sat there in my car, the phone screen still glowing, showing nothing but an empty, silent hallway. But to me, that empty space was the stage where the final act of betrayal was playing out. Windshield wipers swept rhythmically across the glass. Rain pattered softly on the roof. I wondered, for a fleeting second, if I was losing my mind, sitting here, spying like some obsessed stalker. But no, this wasn't obsession. This was reconnaissance. Preparation. This wasn't about jealous rage. This was about strategy. I replayed the short clip. Dylan's face was clear. The way his eyes tracked Claire as she entered, the brief touch of hands at the threshold. It played out like a silent movie. I didn't need sound. I just needed the facts. And they were clearer, colder, than the rain hitting the windshield. About an hour later, I watched Claire leave the hotel via the same feed. She didn't hurry, paused in the lobby to check her reflection in a mirrored pillar, reapplied her lipstick. Then she walked out, her face composed, betraying nothing. She was practiced at this. I followed her again, closer this time. She actually did stop at the grocery store, picked up milk, bread, and a small cheesecake. She was building her alibi, reconstructing the scene for her return. But I knew the real story, and all the evidence I needed was now securely stored on my phone. When Claire pulled into the driveway, I was already inside, sitting in my home office, pretending to sort through old military paperwork. She came in, hung up her coat, walked over, and brushed a cool, dry kiss against my cheek. A gesture of arrival, nothing more. I looked up, met her eyes, and asked mildly, "Buy anything good?" She held up the small grocery bag. "Ben's favorite cheesecake. You know how much he loves it." I nodded slowly. "Good, just one word." But somehow, it felt heavier than any accusation. That night, while she slept, I found myself back in the garage, my sanctuary, the place where I used to meticulously sharpen my folding knife and clean my service weapon after returning from the field. On the workbench lay my phone, the Bluetooth earpiece, and a dusty field notebook I hadn't touched in years. On the first clean page, I wrote only 4 words. Phase 1, recon complete. I didn't know exactly what Phase 2 would entail, but I knew with absolute certainty that I was no longer just the quiet, observant husband. I was the soldier, back on duty, only this time, the mission wasn't about protecting borders. It was about protecting the truth, and about ensuring that those who lived by deceit understood one fundamental rule. When a hunter has acquired the target, he doesn't back down until the engagement is decisively concluded. I launched the counteroffensive on a Friday afternoon as the city eased into the weekend. Claire mentioned she'd be late, a last-minute marketing meeting that ran over. I nodded, offered no questions. She didn't know I'd been tracking her communications all week, and that today was her next scheduled rendezvous with Dylan at the Grand Vista Hotel. I had the data, time-stamped photos from the hotel cameras, archived text messages detailing their plans, real-time GPS confirming her location. But information alone wasn't enough. I didn't just want to expose them. I wanted them to understand the feeling of having the ground ripped out from under them, the way they were trying to do to me. I reached out to an old brother-in-arms from my unit, a cyber warfare specialist, now running high-end security for a major financial firm. We met discreetly at a small, out-of-the-way coffee shop. I slid an encrypted drive across the table, containing everything I'd compiled on Dylan Parker. Hidden bank accounts, shell corporations, records of shady transactions, and crucially, evidence of a massive, well-concealed gambling debt. That was his Achilles heel. I didn't need Dylan arrested, not yet. I needed him broken. Broken from the inside out, his confidence shattered, his reputation ruined, the illusion of his untouchable, affluent world collapsing around him. With a few keystrokes from my contact, the operation began. Dylan's primary business accounts were flagged for suspicious activity. Anonymous tips reached his largest investors. An accidentally leaked internal memo hinted at diverting funds to offshore Cayman accounts. Within an hour, the carefully constructed house of cards that was Dylan Parker's financial life began to tremble. Meanwhile, I sat at home, by the kitchen window, nursing a lukewarm coffee, watching Claire touch up her lipstick in the car's rearview mirror before driving away. Same cream-colored dress. Same small black handbag. But this time, I didn't follow. I already had the live feed from the hotel lobby and hallway cameras routed to my phone. I watched her every step, Claire gliding through the lobby, Dylan meeting her by the elevators, that same smug grin plastered on his face. Except today, something was different. As they waited for the elevator, Dylan's phone buzzed. He glanced down, and the smugness evaporated. His brow furrowed. He showed the screen to Claire. Her own expression shifted from anticipation to confusion, then alarm. The text message, sent from an untraceable burner number courtesy of my cyber ninja friend, contained just 7 words. "You just lost $500,000. I watched Claire's face on my screen. Anxiety flared in her eyes. But it wasn't concern for me, or for our marriage. It was fear. Fear of exposure. Fear for the comfortable life she was risking. She turned to Dylan, whispered something urgently, trying to placate him. But he wasn't listening. The panic was setting in. He was starting to understand that the control he thought he had was slipping through his fingers. I switched off the screen. I didn't need to see anymore. The objective was achieved. An hour later, Claire returned home, later than usual. Her eyes were slightly red, maybe from crying, maybe from arguing. She took off her coat, walked into the kitchen, and found me standing there, exactly where she'd left me, the same half-finished cup of coffee still on the counter. "I'm back," she said, her voice subdued. I turned slowly, looked her up and down, held her gaze, then nodded once. "Still up?" she asked, forcing a casual tone. "Just thinking." She stepped closer, placed a hand hesitantly on my arm, as if trying to soothe a storm she sensed was gathering but couldn't yet see. "I'm sorry I've been so distracted lately. I know I've neglected you and been." I nodded again, but didn't reply to the apology. Instead, I reached into my shirt pocket, pulled out a small, folded piece of paper, and placed it gently on the countertop between us. Claire stared at it, then slowly unfolded it. Inside was a printed screenshot of one of the explicit text messages exchanged between her and Dylan, the one where he called her beautiful. She froze for several seconds. I watched the micro-expressions flicker across her face, the sharp intake of breath, the slight tremor in her jaw, the rapid darting of her eyes as she searched for an escape route that wasn't there. I didn't yell, didn't demand answers, didn't ask why. I just said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "I've known since day one." Claire didn't cry. She knew tears wouldn't work, not now. She just stood there, hands falling limp at her sides, her face pale and drawn. I stepped closer, close enough to smell that faint, unfamiliar cologne clinging to her clothes. The scent that wasn't meant for me. "Why him?" I asked, my tone level, devoid of accusation, just a simple request for a fact I already knew was irrelevant. She flinched slightly. I don't know. It all happened so fast. And you thought I wouldn't find out?" I cut her off, finishing the sentence she couldn't. Silence hung heavy in the air. I tilted my head slightly, lowered my voice so only she could hear. "You picked the wrong man to betray, Claire. I'm not the type to yell and storm out. I'm the type who steps back, assesses, and waits for the opportune moment." She looked at me then, and for the first time, I saw raw fear in her eyes. "Tomorrow," I continued, my voice still quiet but firm, "I want you to stay home. No meetings, no grocery runs, nothing. You're going to see what Dylan Parker really is when his money and his power are stripped away." She didn't argue, didn't protest, just gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. That night, I sat beside Ben's bed long after he'd fallen asleep, reading passages from an old, battered copy of The Call of the Wild I'd carried through multiple deployments. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows, carrying the scent of approaching rain. I watched my son's small chest rise and fall, his dreams still untroubled, and thought, "This battle, it's only just beginning. And I will win it, not with violence, not with shouting, but with time, strategy, and the unwavering, patient silence of a man who knows exactly where his enemy is weakest. And when the moment is right, I will strike, without hesitation, without mercy." That night, the house was unnervingly quiet. No sound of Ben murmuring in his sleep. No muffled footsteps of Claire moving around downstairs. Just the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the occasional gust of wind sighing through the eaves, like the calm before a final, decisive storm. I lay in bed, hands clasped behind my head, staring up at the dark ceiling. Claire lay beside me, turned away, curled into a tight ball near the edge of the mattress. Her breathing was shallow, uneven. She wasn't asleep. I knew it. She was pretending, waiting. It had been 3 days since I'd laid the printed text message on the counter. 3 days since Dylan Parker's world started to unravel. There had been no shouting matches, no dramatic confrontations. Just this heavy, suffocating silence, thick with unspoken truths and impending consequences. At 1:54 a.m., Claire's phone vibrated on the nightstand, the third time that night. Each time, she checked it stealthily, shielding the screen's glow. But this time was different. Instead of just glancing, she quietly unplugged it, slipped out of bed, and padded out of the room, her bare feet making almost no sound on the carpet. I didn't move, just reached under my pillow for my own phone. The mirrored text messages from Dylan were already there, forwarded in real time. Dylan, they froze everything. All my accounts. What the hell is going on? A minute later, Claire's reply popped up. Claire, I don't know. But Ethan, he's different. He's too quiet. It's scaring me. I rose silently, pulled on a t-shirt, and followed her path downstairs. Bathed in the dim, yellowish light spilling from the kitchen, Claire stood with her back to the hallway, phone pressed hard against her ear. No, I don't think he knows everything, she whispered frantically into the phone. But something's wrong. I can feel it. He's watching me. Her voice was strained, fragmented, laced with rising panic. You need to be careful. We need a new plan. Meet soon, but we can't leave any trace this time. None. She ended the call, sank onto a kitchen stool, and buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking slightly. It looked like she was trying physically hold together the pieces of her life as they fractured around her. I watched her from the shadows of the doorway. Her breath came in ragged gasps. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I saw it clearly in her posture, in the desperate tension of her hands, not defiance, not justification, just pure, unadulterated fear. I retreated back upstairs before she sensed my presence. When she eventually returned to the bedroom, I feigned deep sleep, breathing evenly. But my senses weren't fooled. They were heightened, attuned to the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere, the prolonged stillness that spoke volumes. Claire climbed back into bed, staying as close to her edge as possible, curling up tightly again. The faint scent of her perfume still lingered, but it no longer felt familiar or comforting. It just reminded me. I was sharing my bed with a stranger. The next morning, Claire left for work early, skipping breakfast. I stood in my office, coffee mug in hand, watching through the window as she walked briskly to her car without a backward glance. I pulled up the saved security footage from the hotel from the previous day. Watched Dylan Parker emerge from the elevator, his face pale, phone still glued to his ear, lips moving silently as if reciting a desperate prayer. Something in his frantic stride told me he was cracking. But it wasn't enough. For men like Dylan, a crack isn't a collapse. He needed to be completely dismantled. I opened a secure file on my laptop. Inside were meticulously organized documents detailing Dylan's financial skeletons, tax evasion, illicit money transfers, evidence of using shell companies for illegal investments. It was all compiled, verified, and ready. I drafted an anonymous email, attached the encrypted file, and sent it to a well-respected investigative journalist known for tackling corporate corruption. A journalist who owed me a quiet favor from years ago. The fuse was lit. All it needed was time. But Claire, she still seemed to think she had some measure of control. That evening, after Ben was asleep, I was wiping down the kitchen counters when Claire walked in. She wore a sleek black dress I'd never seen before. Not her usual style for work, and definitely not for staying home with me. I'm heading out for a bit, she announced, her voice attempting casualness. Maddie called, wants to grab a quick drink. Maddie was her oldest friend, a convenient, plausible alibi. I put down the dishcloth, turned, and let my eyes travel slowly from her high heels up to her carefully applied makeup. Her gaze faltered for a split second before she forced a small smile. Performing. Always performing. I nodded, stepped back slightly, gesturing towards the door. As she reached for her purse, I said, "Have fun. Be back soon." She paused, her hand tightening on the purse strap. "Yeah, won't be late." I held her gaze, offered a faint, unreadable smile. "Good. Wouldn't want Ben waking up and not finding his mom here." She nodded quickly, almost jerky, then turned and walked out. As the sound of her car engine faded down the street, I pulled out my phone, opened the tracking app. The red dot moved steadily towards the west side of the city, towards the Grand Vista Hotel. Again, I didn't need to follow this time. I already had the live feed from the 14th floor camera queued up. On the screen, Claire stepped out of the elevator, checked her reflection in the mirrored wall, smoothed her dress, and walked towards room 1408. The door opened. Dylan appeared. But this time, there was no smile, no suave greeting. He looked haunted, glancing nervously up and down the empty hallway before practically yanking Claire inside, as if they were fugitives about to be apprehended. And in a way, they were. They were being watched. Every furtive glance, every hushed, panicked word behind that closed door, it was all playing out exactly as I'd anticipated. That night, Claire came home late. Very late. I was still sitting at the kitchen table, an untouched glass of amber liquid in front of me. When the door opened and she stepped inside, I looked up, said nothing. She avoided my eyes, slipped off her shoes, and walked slowly towards the table. "Sorry," she murmured, not meeting my gaze. "Maddie, wasn't feeling well. Had a terrible headache." I had to make sure she got home okay. I stared at her for a long, silent moment. Then, I nodded slowly. "Right. I understand." I stood up, turned, and walked towards the stairs, leaving her standing alone in the dimly lit kitchen. And I knew, without raising my voice, without issuing a single threat, just by the weight of that unwavering silence, she was finally, truly beginning to break. So much so that later that night, for the first time since my return, I heard Claire cry out in her sleep. A short, sharp gasp, followed by frantic tossing and turning. I knew, because I wasn't sleeping. I lay there, listening as she struggled against unseen demons in her dreams, calling out a name that wasn't mine and wasn't Dylan's, just a muffled, choked sound of pure terror. And then, in the moment she jolted awake, gasping, heart pounding, turning her head sharply to look at me, only to see me lying perfectly still beside her, eyes closed, breathing evenly, the picture of calm repose. I heard her swallow hard in the darkness. I didn't move, didn't open my eyes, because I knew, tonight, she had finally started to see her own reflection staring back from the shadows on the wall. And that was only the beginning of the end. That night, the rain held off, but the air was thick and heavy, clinging like the aftermath of a storm just offshore. The city outside was wrapped in a thin mist, a shroud for secrets better left unspoken. Inside the house, the only light came from the small lamp left on at the end of the upstairs hallway. I sat at the kitchen table, the coffee in my mug long cold, my hand resting flat on the cool wood surface. My eyes were fixed on the darkness at the top of the stairs. I didn't need to make a sound. I knew Claire was standing there, hidden just behind the wall, her breathing ragged with a panic she could no longer conceal. After a silence that stretched for minutes, feeling tight enough to suffocate, she stepped out. One slow, hesitant step at a time, like walking on shattered glass. She wore the same thin robe, her hair tangled, her face pale and etched with sleeplessness. She stopped beside the table but didn't sit. Her gaze flickered from my untouched coffee cup to my face. You've known everything all along, haven't you?" Her voice was barely a thread, trembling in her throat. I looked up at her, didn't nod, didn't shake my head, just held her gaze in the silence. And in that quiet, I could hear the frantic scrabbling of someone losing their grip on the cliff face. "Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you confront me? Yell? Get angry?" She pressed, her voice rising slightly, pitched with desperation, as if my very silence was more terrifying than any rage she might have imagined. I rested my elbows on the table, slowly twisting the simple gold wedding band on my finger. The metal felt cold against my skin, a tangible reminder of vows made, promises exchanged, of things that were once real. "Because I didn't have to," I replied, my voice steady, level, stripped of any discernible emotion. Claire stood frozen, her lips pressed into a thin line. In her eyes now, I wasn't the husband who used to hold her on cold nights. I was something else, an implacable force, a silent storm gathering power just before it breaks. I never wanted things to turn out like this," she stammered, her voice cracking on the last word. I felt lost, adrift. Dylan showed up when I was vulnerable. I didn't plan any of it. It just spiraled, and then you thought I wouldn't find out," I finished for her, cutting through the excuses. She fell silent. For a few seconds, her gaze drifted away, searching the shadows of the kitchen as if seeking an escape hatch that didn't exist. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket, pulled out a plain white envelope, and placed it gently on the table. "Inside are the divorce papers, already signed by me. All you need to do is add your signature." Claire recoiled as if struck. You want to end it? Just like that?" I nodded. But before she could protest further, I lifted my chin, meeting her eyes directly. But there are two ways this can end, Claire. She held her breath. The kitchen suddenly felt claustrophobically small, the walls closing in. Option 1, I stated, my voice calm, clinical. You sign those papers. Right now. You pack a bag with only your personal belongings and you're out of this house by morning. You walk away from everything else. No claim on any assets. No custody of Ben. You disappear. And I give you my word, no one comes looking for you. She visibly trembled. You can't take my son away from me. I leaned back slightly, exhaled slowly. You did that yourself, Claire? The moment you invited another man into his world, into his home, you had choices. You made yours. Now, it's my turn to make mine. She bowed her head. The shadows cast by the hallway light carved deep lines onto her face, making her look like a fractured statue. And option 2, she whispered. I produced a small, black USB flash drive from my pocket and placed it deliberately next to the envelope. If you refuse to leave quietly, if you try to fight this, I will submit the entire contents of this drive to the court, to Child Protective Services, and anonymously leak it to every business associate and contact Dylan Parker has left. It contains everything: the videos, the messages, bank records, proof of his financial crimes, proof of your complicity. Claire stared at the flash drive as if it were a viper poised to strike. You spied on me? To that extent. No, I corrected her softly. I tracked the lies. And the lies led me directly to you. She didn't cry. Tears were useless now, a currency that had lost all value. She just stood there, shoulders slumped, looking like someone who had woken up from a long, destructive dream only to find the wreckage was real. Can I see Ben? Before I go? She asked, her voice thick with unshed tears. I considered her for a long moment. Then, I nodded. But you will not tell him anything but the truth. That you made mistakes. That you have to leave for a while. And that none of it, is his fault. Her hand rested on the table, fingers trembling slightly. She nodded mutely. I stood up, stepped back towards the staircase, then paused at the threshold. Claire. I said her name quietly. She looked up, her eyes filled with a dawning, desolate understanding. You were once the person I trusted most in this world. Now, you're just a name I used to know. Then I turned and walked away, leaving her alone with the papers and the flash drive. Each step I took up the stairs echoed in the silent house like the final closing of a door, sealing off a part of my life forever. That night, Claire didn't sleep in our bed. I heard her softly open Ben's door much later, heard the faint murmur of her voice, the choked back sobs muffled by his quiet breathing. I sat in the darkness of my office, staring at an old framed photograph on the desk, the three of us, years ago, smiling, holding hands in a park ablaze with autumn leaves. The photograph hadn't changed, but the people in it were gone. And I knew that tomorrow morning, when the first light touched the windows, something essential would leave this house permanently. The next morning dawned gray and overcast. The sun struggled to break through a thick layer of clouds, casting a muted, somber light over the neighborhood. I stood at the kitchen window, nursing a fresh cup of black coffee, watching the scene unfold on the front lawn. Claire fumbled with the laces on her sneakers one last time, standing beside a single, small suitcase placed near the curb. It was one of my old deployment bags, the rugged canvas still faintly marked with dust from deserts half a world away, the one where Ben used to tuck drawings inside the lining. Now it held her clothes, and the end of our life together. She didn't look up towards the house. She knew I was there, watching, but she didn't meet my eyes. Maybe out of shame, maybe out of fear, maybe because she finally understood that words were utterly meaningless now. Ben was still asleep upstairs. I hadn't allowed her to wake him for a tearful goodbye. I wanted his memory of his mother's presence to fade gently, untainted by the trauma of a dramatic departure. I'd figure out how to explain it later, frame it in a way a child could eventually understand. Sometimes grown-ups have to go separate ways, not because they stopped loving, but because they got lost and couldn't find their way back together. Claire opened the door of a waiting taxi, heaved the suitcase onto the back seat. The sound of the wheels rolling briefly on the concrete walkway was a small, mournful punctuation mark in the quiet morning air. I still said nothing. No final words. No accusations. No pleas. No regrets offered or sought. Just a single, almost imperceptible nod as her gaze flickered towards the window for a fraction of a second before she climbed into the cab, and that was the final farewell. 3 days later, the name Dylan Parker splashed across the headlines of the country's major financial news outlets. I didn't need to read the articles in detail. The titles told the story. Prominent real estate developer under investigation for money laundering and investment fraud. A small footnote in one article mentioned authorities reportedly acting on detailed anonymous tip, including emails, bank records, and incriminating hotel security footage. No one knew I was the source. No one ever would. For me, justice didn't need a public announcement or a victory lap. It just required the right leverage applied at the right time and the patient silence of someone willing to wait for the inevitable fallout. Dylan Parker vanished from the social scene. His company shuttered its doors, first temporarily, then permanently. His flashy cars disappeared. His properties were quietly liquidated. Rumors circulated. Some said he fled the country. Others whispered he was arrested trying to use fake documents at the airport. I didn't track down the specifics. Didn't care which version was true. All that mattered was that he was gone, erased from my life, and more importantly, from Ben's future. As for Claire, she sent a single, brief email about a week later. Just 3 short sentences. I signed everything. I won't contest custody. Take care of Ben for me. I'm sorry. I read it, then deleted it without replying, not out of anger, but because an apology offered only after the consequences have landed, after the damage is irrevocably done, isn't about seeking forgiveness. It's just the hollow echo of regret arriving far too late. Life settled into a new rhythm, our new normal. I took Ben to school, went through the motions of work, cooked dinners, cleaned the house, read bedtime stories. Every night, I'd finish a chapter, then sit beside his bed for an extra 10 minutes, just listening to the sound of his steady breathing in the quiet dark. His dreams, at least, were still intact, untouched by the wreckage. I never spoke ill of his mother to him, never poisoned his memories or planted seeds of resentment. When he asked, I simply said that Mom needed some time away to heal, to figure things out. That sometimes, even when people love each other, they realize they can't make each other happy anymore, and the bravest thing to do is to step back. Once, Ben looked up at me with his serious, 8-year-old eyes and asked, "Dad, are you sad?" I met his gaze, managed a small smile. "Yeah, buddy. Sometimes I am. But being sad is okay. It's part of life. What matters is not letting the sadness make you forget who you are." He seemed to accept that, nodded solemnly, and went back to coloring a picture of a bright red fire truck. And in that moment, I knew I'd won the most important battle, not against Claire or Dylan, but against the corrosive bitterness that had threatened to consume me. I stopped wearing my wedding ring. It now rests in a box in my desk drawer, alongside that old autumn photograph. Not because I want to forget, but because I've remembered enough. One cool evening, while cleaning out my office, I came across the duplicate file, the signed divorce decree, copies of the evidence I'd compiled. I took them out to the backyard, to the stone fire pit where Ben and I had roasted marshmallows last summer. I struck a match, touched it to the corner of the papers. They caught quickly. Flames licked across the typed words, the signatures, consuming the painful history until only gray ash remained. The firelight flickered in my eyes, reflecting not anger or triumph, but a surprising, quiet sense of release. As if, finally, I had truly let go. A breeze stirred, carrying the ashes away into the night sky. And I thought, justice doesn't require applause. It doesn't need the villain brought to their knees begging for mercy. Sometimes, it just requires one person to be strong enough not to seek revenge, but to find closure by choosing their own freedom. I walked back into the quiet house, closing the door softly behind me. The sound echoed slightly in the empty hall. In the dim light, I saw my own shadow stretch long across the hardwood floor. No Claire. No Dylan. No more burning questions of why. Just me, and the quiet promise of a new beginning waiting on the other side of the pain. A world where I could rebuild, this time on solid ground, without shadows lurking behind every smile, every word. I didn't need anyone else to witness it, because sometimes the most powerful forgiveness is the one that requires no words at all.